Hello and welcome to Biz Passion Voice. Today we have an interview with Christina Pratt, who I'm super excited to have on today. Christina is a healer, author, and teacher of exceptional clarity, humor, and practicality at Last Mass Center in Portland, Oregon. So there they specialize in this diagnosis of why a person gets stuck, trapped, or blocked, even after they've done all the things like, heal from trauma, rewrite the narrative, align purpose and vision, all the things, right? We're so used to doing to get ourselves situated. And they're really after going down a path of healing. They do one-on-one work and increase new life skills in their online community, which we're going to talk about a lot today, hopefully. The online curriculum focuses on deep liberation process, shadow transformation protocol, and healing our ancestral lines. Welcome, Christina. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here and excited to talk with you.
Yay. Yes. One of the reasons why I'm so excited that you're here is because you do have a focus on community. That's one of the things I bonded with you over when we finally got to chat. And it's something that I find is necessary and kind of an automatic for my business, but it's still a tricky area, right? It's one of those tricky areas, like what does community mean? How do you build one? They're either, we're kind of sometimes feeling that it's either there or it's not, but how do you build one? And especially, over the years. So how do you think of community when it comes to your work and community?
It's actually this word we all want so badly, but then as we move in, there's a whole lot of stuff that arises, and we're not even talking about the same thing. You think it'd be so simple, but it's really not in today's world. And I just want to name part of the reason I believe it is challenging for us is because the strategies of imperialism, colonizing, settling, et cetera, that the actual logic of doing that well, successfully, is to break people's relationships with each other, with their ancestors, with the land, with what they consider home. And so part of the reason we land here today in this moment, having this conversation, is that much of what allows people to naturally build community, which I do believe they do when they're allowed to, is systematically severed and then normalized to keep it severed. And so I just want to name that's why we're all so confused. One of the main reasons. And yet our hearts long to connect, and that we are relational beings. And so for me, also to sort of place my own arc in time, when I started working was over 30 years ago. And the attitude was basically people were looking for an interesting vacation to come work with me, or take what you like and leave the rest. And the problem with that, although we do need to have things align with our own sense of truth and meaning, the other problem with that, of course, is most people leave everything that makes them uncomfortable, which is usually the things that help them progress and grow. So that's problematic, but that's where it began. And so when you begin with those kinds of ideas floating around, what you have is, if community forms, it's simply around a common interest, which there's nothing wrong with, right? But it's kind of like a bowling league, right? As long as we're bowling, like we're all community, and maybe we do a potluck, but what happens when someone's mother dies, right? What happens when the kids are suddenly not in school because we have COVID? Like those common interest groups really aren't structured with the sort of multi-relationship, relationships of relationships, networks of relationships, networks of networks, the way that a whole community builds out. It's not that complex. It's simple. We're bowling or we're not.
Yeah.
Right? And that doesn't really become this sort of basket that we want to be held in when we talk about the kind of community that restores in our lives what was lost as people were moved off their homes, either by war or by whatever problematic behavior some group of human beings was doing to another group of human beings at that particular time, which is our history. And so this is where we are at this time, when our severing of community with the earth, right, just letting the earth have its own personhood and clean water being a person that we need. I mean, we're at a place where our lack of community with our physical world we live in, that supplies all of the resources we need to live, is highly problematic.
Yes.
Right. And so where do we begin? Right. So this is a really long, not very exciting preamble. What is community? Yeah. And so what I've discovered over the arc of over 30 years is that healthy community depends on the individual who is going to be in relationship with someone being in good inner relationship with their own inner self. And that if I, as that individual, am carrying a history of unresolved trauma and an inability to work with that myself, then that the inability to work with it and the results of that unresolved trauma, which is those problematic narratives and all of those ways I keep falling in the same potholes, and not at all to diminish that, but all of that becomes the community's job. Mm-hmm. And yet the community can't do anything about it, right? Because my most intimate inner relationships are mine to, I'm the person of power in that dynamic with myself. There's nobody else there but me, right? And so I have to bring myself to community, very much like Kennedy said long ago, which was, ask not what the community can do for you, but what are you going to do for the community? Like, I have to bring myself ready to be a person to be in community with, and knowing I will fail at times. So that's the other thing about my understanding of community, is there's this restorative capacity in it. I can say, wow, I did that badly. I am really sorry. Let me figure that out, because that was not what I wanted to create. So let me figure myself out here, and that you have the generosity to let me come back and go, can I circle back to that with you? I sucked. Let me try again. And that there's enough generosity in the relationships of that community that people can make mistakes, because without that, we will never grow and we will not learn. We won't become these people that we do need to be. So community is based on skills for the individual to work on their inner community so they can show up in a certain sense of presence with others. I can hear what others are saying, not just what I think they're saying, right? I can see them, not project all my unresolved issues on them, and see them as my mother or my lover or my whatever, right? So I come with some community-based skills, and the community relationships allow that generosity for some restoration and growth and healing. We're all going to mess up, right? And there's an understanding that fundamentally the community's role is speeding us all up in our understanding of what is required to be a good human in our time. And I don't have to reinvent that wheel, and you reinvent that wheel. Everybody's trying to reinvent that wheel, because we can all see where that goes. Not everybody actually gets a wheel, right? So how do I be a good human? Because I have a unique genius. You have a unique genius. Every single individual person has a piece of the vision, of the voice, of the gift, of the medicine, whatever we want to call it. There's a million ways to call it, but we all have a piece of what moves us towards a healthy future for the next generations. And if anyone is silenced or silences themselves, right? If anyone, we don't listen because they're an outlier, we don't want to hear, if we're a community that doesn't support that individual gift to come forward, the community grows weak thin and repetitious and dogmatic, and all of these really problematic fundamentalist things that happen in communities where the individuals are not being supported in bringing their gifts. So if I can do a decent job being a good human, I've got my energy that can move towards what is mine to do. What is this thing that only I can do? And how do I do it in a way that I'm giving it to my community and that it can be received by the community? And so that becomes the wealth of the community. And then the whole individual community dynamic grows together in a way that they don't just sort of eddy out into this very fundamentalist, repetitious, everybody has to be the same as everybody else kind of long-term communities, but that comes at the cost of people's uniqueness and their own thinking and their own growth, their own creativity. So I find there's certain communities that have great longevity, but not a lot of restorative productivity towards how do we do this differently where we need to, right?
Right. Well,
And
even
how do
an
we,
eye to that,
yeah.
right? And I think, there's so much there, all right? There's so much there because really in that first conversation, I'm wondering, how do we have, like, because you were talking about those club communities, essentially, we all have the same likes, community, and how that breaks down when we aren't in true support in the other networks and relationships that occur in our lives. I was even thinking about this when it comes to like our kind of online friendships, right? But because I realized that if it was an in-person friend, I would have thought about a dynamic of, oh, I haven't seen her in a while, a lot differently, right? Because if it was an in-person friendship, I'd be like, well, what happened? Like, is she okay? But I didn't even think that there could be something wrong because it was an online friendship. I don't expect to see her every day, this kind of thing, right? And I would like to go ahead and jump into the other one, even though I have a ton of questions around what you just said. But I wanted to go ahead and talk about the time differential on this because you've been building communities since how long ago?
The 1990. Yeah.
1990. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And like just again a little bit of that perspective on the how it's grown and changed over these 30 years.
So the first thing that I learned, and it's a hard lesson, honestly, my communities have sort of coalesced and collapsed again and again. And I try to understand what is happening as this community is trying to grow into a more mature form. Basically, if you think of a community as has its own energy body, let's say it's a composite of relationships, which then need to be tended in the way we tend all relationships. We want to have life and vitality in them. I mean, we all love that friend that we never talk to, but when we suddenly, come together after 10 years, it's been as if no time has passed. We have a great time, and then we don't talk to each other for 10 years. I mean, yes, that's fun, but those aren't the relationships that build community. Right. What builds community is the fact that you know where to go get tomatoes, who can help you with your plumbing, you know who has children your age so that you can maybe all get all the kids in one place and have two moms take care of them while everybody else goes and does something fun with grown-ups that can make full sentences. Right. That's community. Right.
Yeah.
And that there's a diversity in true community that is embraced as the richness and value in the community versus this whole community, the idea that communities only hang together if everybody's the same. That's really problematic dynamic. So anyway, in my community, the first thing that really strangleholded the community that was forming was that people were coming to relationship as Americans do. What can I get from this? It's a very transactional thing, wanting to know what can I get, how, and what more could I get for less? And so if that's how you're coming to community, it is going to fail.
Yeah.
Right. It is. It just is. You can't. And we're so deeply embedded in the assumed normalcy of a consumer-based culture
Yeah.
and being trained to be good consumers. Like if I ever wrote a science fiction book, it would be start out with the main character, someone like myself, being arrested for not spending enough money, not consuming enough. I mean, we're so, we're so compelled in that way. And so we come by this honestly. These were not bad people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We just were naive, myself included. And we didn't see that we were being completely transactional in our relationships. And so the interesting thing that happened is, obviously it wasn't working. And so I work with helping spirits. It's another piece of where my sort of solutions to my problems come from, is I have particular helping spirits that I have spent a lot of years developing a reliable working relationship with, and I trust their guidance because it proves to be good and effective in my life, and ethical and moral. Although that's my piece of it, is I have to bring that to the conversation. But still, in my dynamic with these helping spirits, my decision making is better than it would be alone. Okay, so with that said, with that caveat, so I asked how to solve this problem that was happening and offering this 4-year program. 4 years is a long time to invest in anything. It's a 4-year program. It invites you to really change how you approach living your life. It's big, it's comprehensive, it's a big investment of time and energy. And to do it, you need peers. Well, that actually means community, right? And so how do we do that became a really big issue. Right. And so the first one fails because everyone's being transactional and doesn't really realize that. And so I ask, how do we do this? This is the people that we are. So how do we do this? And the answer was community. And I'm like, but that's the question.
Nice.
Yeah. So we did many versions of trying to understand what did that mean that we needed to do. So like, for example, one version was, well, you're effectively a not-for-profit organization. So you need a board, and that board would be your community. And so we convened a board, just like you would for a not-for-profit. We went down that path. It was a catastrophic disaster in that we decided that the community needed essentially an event planner to take the admin out so everybody in the community could just enjoy what the community life was about, including me.
Yeah.
Right. And we hired, whole process, salary, the whole deal, big search. We hired the absolutely most perfectly wrong person to work with me of any human being on the entire planet that speaks English. So it was a really clear message. This is the wrong answer. This is not the community you were told to force. So I finally just said, okay, so what is that community?
Yeah.
Show us. And so we were given this. So with community, so with 12 other people, we all worked with spirit to ask, what does this community look like? And so this next version of the community largely failed because as people who are trained really initially to be religious people and not necessarily actively engaged spiritual people, like these teachings are teaching us to be actively engaged in working relationships with spirit, seeing the life force in all things and not putting human beings on the top of the consciousness mountain, things like that. We don't really know how to do that. We're just learning how to do that. And so this community failed largely because we didn't trust the vision. It was we didn't understand how to trust the vision and sort of bring it down into action so that it became the equivalent for our community of basically knowing where the baker is and going to the baker for bread, maybe gluten-free bread, but not to fix your car. I mean, there's certain basic understandings of how our communities work, and we couldn't close the gap between this assumption of community that's functional in our lives and what we were being given. And so we had to keep working in sort of a failed version of what we were doing to come to finally understand that the community is never any more than the sum of its parts. And so whatever the community needed to be doing as community, we needed to be doing as individuals. I mean, I know that sounds really simple, and maybe it is simple, but it's really challenging to do.
Yeah.
Right. So the health of the community really depends on the daily health of each individual. So how do I take responsibility for my part in that and show up as a community member without then enabling them to not show up for their part in that? So it suddenly requires people to be grounded. People don't live in their heads. People have healthy boundaries, and people develop this really big capacity for discomfort in a culture that is inviting us, as we get more and more apps, to set more and more preferences. So we never experience any discomfort outside of our preference zone for the whole day. And so here we're trying to swing people towards developing this really good capacity to be in discomfort with diverse ideas and things and work with each other in this community. And in our lives, everybody's being invited onto social media and more and more just shutting out anything I don't want that's going to make me the slightest bit uncomfortable. I mean, when I was a kid, you listened to the radio.
Yeah.
You got really excited every once in a while when you heard your favorite songs, but the rest of the time you have to listen to everybody else's favorite songs that weren't yours.
Yeah.
You didn't get to create this perfect playlist for your life that you never hear anything you don't want to hear. I mean, there are people that have been shot because they were playing music somebody with a gun in the United States didn't want to hear. That's messed up, right? But that's what I mean about how if we don't actively, robustly develop this capacity to be in discomfort with each other in a productive, restorative way, not a cyclical, we're just grinding into this dysfunction way.
Dysfunction, yeah.
Right, but in a way that we are growing out of our dysfunction, we're not going to be able to do this.
Yeah. So is that how you would describe, because I had a conversation with somebody earlier on our interviews about the community in the Aquarian age, and we were talking about kind of features of what will be necessary as we kind of move into this individuation versus and then higher level community dynamic. And I'm kind of curious as to what you have to say about that and how it looks moving forward. And then also just in that way, like we brought in the idea of ritual and ceremony. And then how much is that, kind of the scariness moving back to the old kind of, church-like structures, and then how much of it can be what's meant for what's moving forward.
Yeah. So for me, I don't actually think we're going to do it without true ritual and true ceremony, but I want to define those words and what I mean by a true ritual and true ceremony, because I agree with you. If we just go back to like a new version of the old way. So for example, there's a lot of people that come to me and my work because they have fallen away from Catholicism or Christianity or Judaism or whatever, right? Some organized religion.
Yeah.
What happens is they just plug in some new energy where they used to have God, and they don't really change the structure that's running their life internally, right? Until they actually get into the teachings and realize they're going to have to do that. And honestly, a lot of people leave because of that. This recognition that I don't just get to plug in a more pleasant version of the old story. Mm-hmm. I have to delete the old story. And that is personal work, and it will be uncomfortable, right? And so since it is work, it does take time and energy. Yes, you are going to have to feel your emotions. You are going to have to change your mind. Like there's a lot to that people don't like doing, right? And so again, we get back to this whole, the culture has to have this capacity to go, oh, we're in that mode. Let's shift over. And now we're dealing with this discomfort, and then moving this discomfort into the process it's asking for. Because my perspective about, I have to go back to your question in a minute, but my perspective about these dysfunctions or illnesses is we don't apply what we know from the physical world to our spiritual, mental, and an emotional illness or dysfunction, right? If I have a broken leg, right, you are not going to treat me for a cold. You are going to set my leg. I mean, it's like the physical injury defines the treatment. Now, granted, there could be a Chinese medicine treatment or an allopathic treatment, but you get my point, right? It's like you still have to treat the cold or the broken leg, right? Or you're not going to get in where. That exact same thing is true emotionally, in our emotional body, in our mental body, and our spiritual body. The wound defines the solution it needs. So if someone says to me, well, I don't do group stuff. It's like, well, everything that needs a group to heal isn't going to heal then.
Right.
You don't get to say that. So sorry, I kind of got off your question. So
no, this because I feel like it's on the way to that answer, because you kind of have to deal with that scenario in order to realize maybe that's how I'm thinking is going, is how ritual and ceremony must be evolved in our new communities.
Yeah. So this is a place, I have to admit, in the last 2 years of COVID, I have lost my fangirl energy around certain presenters that I was following, because once COVID hit, I saw this change and I see everybody afraid to use the R word, ritual. I'm just like, we aren't going to do this without it, people, because it is through ritual that we truly create change. So I think of ritual like a tornado, where that tornado point touches down, it is changed by that, where that touches down. And so ritual is a way that human beings invite larger energies in to assist us in making some change happen. And we need some very specific, some fairly surgical changes to happen, but we need help from the larger all that is to guide us in doing that, or we will create a new version of the same issue we have right now, because that's what we do. Like we need, a new energy to come in to help us to do that. And my own personal process that I teach is absolutely ritual driven, that it is all about divined rituals for this particular moment, these particular people at this time, to make XYZ transformation happen. And so we do, and they're elemental rituals. We're not calling in deities or other people's religions or other people's traditions. We're just working with the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, to help us to transform. We couldn't do this work without it. And I personally believe, without beginning to bring back the capacity for ritual to tend the gate of birth, coming in, the transition from childhood to adulthood, and then the transition into eldership, and ultimately eldership into death and back out of the body. If we don't bring in the rituals to hold those gates well, it isn't going to change. It's dropping that responsibility. Historically, there's many places different people's dropped it, or were forced to drop it, or whatever the reason was. But without it, if we don't begin again to tend those gates of our human transitions through life through ritual, and allow a greater wisdom to join us in doing that, it isn't going to change. And I absolutely feel so strongly about this. And those rituals need to be held in community. And so then, okay, crap, we're back to this community thing again, and it's challenging. But the other thing is ceremony. So if you take our whirlwind, right, with its point that went boom, created change, which we're not in control of, right? We have to experience that change and then follow through. That's my understanding of ritual. Ceremony is that whirlwind is upside down. And so you're calling spirit in to reinforce the status quo, to strengthen the bonds of the community, to help us come together as one. And that ceremony, true ceremony, is really abused in cults. And so that's a really tricky line for us to walk, just to name that. It is people, as we're seeing right now in our world, this is, where are we, 2022, right? This abuse of this repetition of language, it's called dog whistles, but basically it's this language that's being repeated, that's playing into people's unresolved emotional stuff and things they're validly frustrated about and feel they're powerless to affect. And we've got cults spinning off everywhere.
Yeah.
All of this fundamentalist thinking, different fundamentalist thinking across the whole spectrum, right? Which is this real abuse of vision and abuse of ceremony.
Yes.
And so people are going to be even less able to trust those communities that are trying to build a path forward for us. This is my all of humanity gesture. How do we do that together when people are involved right now in things that they really are going to wonder, who do I trust? How do I trust myself? I was completely blinded by what happened, and I lost 6 years of my life in that fundamentalist, whatever it was. And so it's really tricky. You're absolutely right. The whole ritual and ceremony thing are absolutely essential and really tricky because it is so easy for us unintentionally to abuse our power. Right, which is why this whole, for me, part of being with you on this show is, if we are not encouraging people to find their own voice, their own sovereignty, their own understanding, they are actually writing their own story or repeating an old story. Everybody has to get to that place for us to be able to do what we're talking about, which is to engage in powerful ritual, engage in powerful ceremony in a way that no one's abusing the power, their own, right, or the other power they're bringing in. And that, is everybody's dream of community, right? Is, where do I go to restore, to give, to receive in a way that I can trust that everybody here is not just trying to extract from me or manipulate me, right?
Right. Yes. And I think, that to me hits upon why, the centerpiece of my work, which is voice, right? Like once we can hear our own and connect to our own emanation of spirit, then we can then be more trusting of our source of right and wrong, yes or no, and be able to make those decisions that can serve us, but don't eliminate, the openness of love and a connection that we're also having. But you can't have that if you don't have that connection with yourself. And I feel like that's kind of that dichotomy that is evolving as we are attempting to move into this next. We're doing our best, but there's so much work to do because of all the things you just spoke about, which, the historical precedent is daunting, and then our overcorrection, or however you want to see it, is complicating, right? It's like just like making everything exponentially more complicated. And what I know is that there's like the through line, at least for me up to this point, it's not always easy to see, but it's always right, which is simplicity.
Yes.
If we can bring it back to a point of simplicity and the simple things where it's like, okay, yes, I'm inviting, but I'm allowing for your decision to participate or not participate, to speak or not to speak. We talked a little bit about that in the other conversation as well, because I find that in the way we talk in panel, or even in when we're talking about making changes in community, there's still a tendency to leave out softer spoken, more contemplative persons, but people that take more time to come to their own decisions and understanding and voice, right? And has that come up for you in your community, and how do you enfold them, and not leave them behind if that's possible?
Yeah. So a huge yes to everything you just said. There was a lot there, an absolutely big yes. And sort of the irony of this whole situation for me and where my life has gone is I really am an extremely introverted person. I can literally go 3 weeks or more without even realizing I haven't spoken to anybody. And I really am deep, serious, contemplative person. And so it's very, very weird to be, out in the world where you're in these communities where the extroverted people are just sucking up all the air, right? It's just, and they're just being themselves. That's the other thing, is like, they're not trying to do that. It's just, they're just being who they are. But there was this funny moment. I can't remember how many years back, I don't know, 4 or 5 years back, whenever that, DSM, the definitions of mental illness gets republished regularly. And there was a new version coming out that was going to define introversion as a mental illness. Exactly. That was my face, right? Like, what? And what was really funny about that is all of a sudden there were all of these TED Talks and all of these things where all of these very introverted, very successful people just spoke out. And all of a sudden, there are all of these YouTubes and everything, all these very introverted people talking about how their introversion saved their company, how this, that, and it was finally, because those people don't, they're quiet, they mind really what is their business to do, and they do it as best as they can. And there's not this sense of needing to, change the world. I mean, they do change the world, but they're not trying to get everybody else to behave like them. That's what I mean.
To be even seen changing the world. Like they often want to change the world, but they don't necessarily want people to look at them doing it.
Exactly. So I want to be with people, but I'd like you all to ignore me while I'm here. Because I don't really want to
talk amongst yourselves.
Exactly. So anyway, so your question though, how do we deal with this in my community? So I mean, partly people are forced to address it because it's my community. So I, give people nap time. No, but sort of. So basically we're usually at retreat centers when we're together so that there's room for all of us. And there's always a place designated as the silent space, which means if you go in there, no matter how many people are in there, it is quiet in there so that people that maybe they're sharing a room with somebody and they're going, oh, I need that quiet space and I don't have any personal space, that you can go there and know that is your space. And anyone who isn't quiet can get kicked out. And anybody who's in there can kick anybody out who's not being quiet, because those are the rules. So there's that space. I also really encourage people to do what I call a threshold check, where you're checking the threshold of your own energy and capacity to be present, because people, when they get together in community, they do tend to get caught up in these rich conversations they've missed in their life, maybe especially since a lot of individuals in my community don't have local people that are doing this, right? So they're in these deep conversations and all of a sudden realizing, oh crap, I knew I needed a nap today before the rest of the day, and I don't want to end this conversation. And so we actually normalize people saying, wait, I have to do a threshold check. I have to put a pin in this conversation. I'm having so much fun, but I have got to go take a nap or I won't make it through the night. Right. And so there's a lot of overtly outlining ways that you can manage the demands of this retreat and the demands of your own body, your own attention, your own physical needs for people that have a range of physical capacity, mentally, emotionally, spiritually as well. So part of it is fundamental to the most basic teachings of my community is this checking your own threshold and noticing where it is, honoring it, being truthful, respecting it. And if you don't like where that leaves you, knowing that when you've got resources again, you need to step through that threshold. You should not just accept, oh, this is who I am, these are my limitations, but this is what it is in this moment. And I accept this. And not everybody has different days.
Yeah.
Right? Not just people that are chronically ill, right? Everybody does. So the next thing is realizing I don't like the fact that my threshold almost always has me withdrawn too much from this community. So I want to find out, where's my energy going? and this gets into the actual teachings, is, okay, how can I change where my thresholds are if they're not letting me be who I want to be in the world or do what I want to do? Right. And I'm not saying someone who is often choosing silence and their own company, it needs to change their thresholds. I'm just saying that what we want to look at is allowing people to figure that out, because the other side of that is people that are always sucking up the air. Maybe they're not being as authentic as they think they are. Maybe this is how they learn to perform in their family to get any attention at all. And so it's also allows people to question how they show up, right, how they participate and don't, and start to look at that whole, is this really balanced for who I am at this time? Can I speak up when I need to? Do I know what that even is? Or can I shut up when I need to? Yeah. Do I know when that is?
Yeah. It's just as valid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often, people come and they end up coming into my circle because they realize there's something going on with their voice. It's, either ineffective or they feel unheard, or, and they're like, well, I've never had a problem speaking. I'm a speaker. I do the things. I'm like out there, and they don't realize that there is, essentially dysfunctional level of extroversion, because we've always seen that as introverts before. We don't realize that just because you're talking, just because you're present, doesn't mean that you're connected and you're being effective, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in one of the sort of the next level things that we teach in the community, actually we teach this online, so you don't even need to be in the community to learn to do it. But there's an aspect of it where it's about recognizing that the culture tends to reward not only different people differently because of the color of their skin or their gender or whatever, but we tend to, at work, for example, in our capitalist system here in the United States, let people that are overreacting to things know immediately that they're being inappropriate. Right. But we tend to actually reward people that shut down and pull away and underreact, which is another aspect of whether we're present and our discernment about whether we need to speak or not. Is if someone's already disconnected and shut down, then they're most likely not going to discern that accurately. Right. That they maybe need to be present in the group, but whatever's happened, they've already pulled away. And so we look at that. How do you notice in this teaching? It's how do you notice when life is trying to get you to pay attention to something internally? There is the amping up and the kind of the overreaction to what's going on, but equally there's the underreaction. And people that do that usually don't know because they get rewarded for doing it at work. They're the person that just sits down and gets their work done. Well, but they might be really shut down while they're doing that.
Right. Well, and it's encouraged. And then also, I know that I always knew that I was overly quiet, but then I also knew that there weren't safe spaces for me to speak what I actually thought. So I didn't really consider it a self problem. I considered it a community problem, right? Or a job problem, or it was the dynamic in which I was in that didn't allow for authentic communication. So, so it's kind of that dichotomy as well, where we are needing to look at how do we allow, dissenting views and this kind of thing, as well, without calling it conflict or anger or, well, and anger is not a problem. Conflict's not a problem until you decide that it's wrong,
Exactly. And conflict isn't necessarily trauma. Conflict, we have to be able to function in conflict. And so part of that other thing you brought up is a really important discernment as well, because we can, not hide intentionally, but we can lose track of the signs of our own personal need for our own personal growth that we're ready to do right now. It can be overshadowed in the dysfunction of the culture that we're in, right? Just as you were saying, that because your voice, might not be heard because you're Black, because you're female, because any number of things. It's like nobody wants to listen. I mean, one of the most interesting articles you can read lately is trans men talking about how their world changes now that they pass as men. And all of a sudden, the exact same things they used to be saying that were dismissed in the exact same work group are now treated as if it's genius.
Wow.
And it's just like, anyway, so back to what I was saying. It was not exactly my point, but they're fascinating articles to read.
Yes.
But my point is, it is easy when we're struggling with really injustice, systemic injustice every day in our life, to not realize, oh, my life is bringing this up because I need to look at how I'm doing that internally, because it's so ever present around you. You don't, and it's real, right? You're not noticing. It's also reflecting my own internal, like internalization of that pattern, or my own intrinsic bias, or like you said, maybe you were being too quiet, but how would you ever know? Right? And so that's one of the things we help people in community recognize is what is yours. Mine, not mine, is sort of the basic beginning of the boundaries. Okay, my issue, not my issue, but also me and community in this effort as people that mostly come from dysfunctional families, how to be in healthy community, and then us as an individual in a community in this larger collective, which is pretty dysfunctional. So,
yes. Yeah. Because
so how do
I
we
even think
do
about,
that?
like, I even think about some of the things that I did speak up into, and how that came about as well, and how I would deal with it now, because now I have a lot stronger voice and a lot more capacity to meet things as they are. But I think it takes all those components that you were just speaking to, and it's a high level of development, to be honest. And not everybody has time for that, the kind of work that I did to get to this point, right? So, and then how do we enfold others on the path that aren't quite there yet?
Mhm.
Is always kind of one of my questions, because we're all growing, right?
Yes.
you
Well, and
know,
not everybody does have that time, as you
yeah,
said. This sort of the luxury of personal growth,
right.
which is an odd luxury because a lot of it's really uncomfortable. But still, that we can spare the focus, that we can spare the time, that we can learn new practices. That's huge. And you're right, not everybody does have the time to do that. So one of the things that we look at in our community, because the other thing is, I don't want a community where everybody looks like me. That's not my goal. I can talk to myself all I want. People who are different than I am.
And I did.
And one of the things that we've done is we've taken the skills that we in this community really feel are these sort of basic life skills for anybody in any community to be able to start doing this in a better way, in a healthier way. And we've put them online so that they're available to people that can't necessarily travel to where we are, right? Everything used to be oral transmission, in person, be a community, like physical beings. And yet, even before COVID, we started to move these things into an online platform just to get them out there and more accessible. But then you also have the hurdles of online. Do you have enough bandwidth? And so that's the next thing we thought about. Okay, so how, now that it's out here, how do we make it accessible to a different range of people? And how do we have people that have done this, have resources, value it? How do they contribute back to creating a world where people that don't right now have the resources can access these teachings? And so we're trying to build that into our community awareness, even in the online classes, which are the biggest group, the least depth of training. So we're just from the get-go building that in. And honestly, the other thing we do is we have really strong community sharing guidelines. There's a lot of encouragement to share, everybody to share whatever needs to be shared, and to have guidelines of awareness of that help people find that balance between speaking up and maybe not speaking so much. And I have, unfortunately, with very few people, had to ask people, after repeatedly asking them to follow the guidelines, ask them to leave. Then that's the other part right now is I would like to be able to have a community that everybody could participate in exactly as they are. But if we're unwilling to share a certain basic skill set for how humans are going to function together, it doesn't work.
Right. Yep. And again, that's kind of one of those complex edges where I feel um, like boundary setting, like we need enough pliability, so we're allowing what's desired in, but that we're not taking on toxicity that is not, not
Mhm.
in correlation to the growth of the community.
Exactly. And so there's
Yeah.
one particular sort of fundamentalist um, attitude out in the world that I call the love club. I mean, club.
Oh, okay.
There's a person that, like, the words sound good, which is love is the solution to everything, which ultimately, at the bottom line, I do believe. However, that doesn't mean the right response or the most accurate or the most loving response in every single moment is to just essentially puke out this effusive, false love language onto someone
Yeah.
who's really angry right now. They just want
Right.
to be heard. They don't want your hug.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so for people that just refuse to put down the love club and just learn to listen to people and be silent, we can't manage that, because we are trying to teach that love is the answer. And that's a fake version of it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't work. And so that's been a really challenging piece for us of recognizing as a new community, until we have more people that have a big capacity for real big conflict, we don't have the capacity for that.
Yeah.
That's one of the few kinds of people that we've had to ask to leave, is people that just refuse to embrace what we're doing and just come in with their love club and just have to love club everybody.
Yeah.
It's an odd
Yeah.
thing, right?
No, because I get it totally. It may be odd for somebody, but it's not odd to me because like true engagement comes from those kind of messy ends, and if you're not, I secretly, and maybe not so secretly anymore, but I secretly have it out for kind of this love-centered or heart-centered thinking, because we don't have to work on love. Love is love. And if we're
Nice.
living love, then it is. But if we have to work on aligning to all the things so that we can properly express our love. And I think that is like, you don't need to do heart work, heart chakra work. You need to work with the other stuff so we can get in line with our heart chakra. You know what I'm saying? Your heart is fine. Like, it knows what it's doing. Like, it's doing its job. Like, back off is how I feel about that.
Hallelujah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so if that's all this, and I get people like that, they're just like, all this, and then everything is taxed in the body and in the energetic framework, because you think this is going to fix all the things. It's like, no, it's doing its job. Like, you have to get in line with it.
Because when I live through a day in the life of a human on the planet right now, there's lots of things that hurt my heart. And for me to love it and not listen, why does it hurt? Is this something where being heartbroken about that is a valid response to that situation? Like, what is going on in the Ukraine right now? Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't mean that in some larger resolution in the world, it isn't ultimately going to be loving. But right now, acknowledging how hard that is listening, right? And that's one of the things I think that people miss I notice it in my own couples therapy with our therapist. I love our therapist, and thank goodness for the help that she's given us. But
Yes.
right, what I notice in the processes she offers is they stop at that level, like therapy tends to stop at that level where we actually move into more of an unscripted, what I consider more of a ritual potential space, where I'm in my own body, in my own inner experience, with my own inner fragmentation of these little selves that are irritated about whatever. And that I demonstrate my love, as you were saying, by listening, by validating, and really making sure I hear their perspective and not saying, mom did the best she could. Like, no, that's not what this 3-year-old needs to hear right now. Right.
Right.
And what is that 3-year-old story, and how do I hear her, understand what function she thinks she's still performing for survival here on my behalf, right? And how can I, as the big person, actually truly absolve her of that responsibility to keep doing that function, and really let her know that I got it. I got this. You don't have to do that anymore. That is a love-based conversation, but there may be no, love club going on there. That this is more about engaging with a really either broken or angry or silenced or whatever 3-year-old. And for those of you out there who have raised 3-year-olds, that's a really big emotional energy. We are our emotions at that time. It's huge. It's uncomfortable. It's hard to sit with as a grown up, because it's, it's like, that's the age we try to get them to get it, an indoor voice,
Yeah.
stop being so big. Right. And
Yeah.
how do we, so I agree with you. I absolutely agree that being present in the moment with an agenda, even a love-based agenda, is problematic, because you have an agenda. You are essentially a love fundamentalist, and that doesn't work in community.
It doesn't, and I think we are so often willing to deny our humanity in these things, and it comes back to the being uncomfortable piece that you started with. Really, is that are you willing to sit with the uncomfortability of anger, of conflict? Are you willing to sit with the uncomfortability of listening to something that doesn't feel good? And then how do we um, come together and integrate those things so that we can feel effective and strong and impactful in our community,
Because it's only in doing that we get to that other aspect of community, which is the shared joy.
Yeah.
I mean, really, not just we're all happy and we're all monotone together, but this shared, loud, messy, celebratory joy of this accomplishment we've done as a community. Or I'm just trying to think of some moments, because I'll just talk about discomfort. Like, why would we want to do that community? It's uncomfortable all the time. But the other side of that is, because we're willing to do that, we get to be like, we had this one gathering several years ago where we listened to our first elders speak to us about the medicine, like the big medicine they gained from their life lived.
Wow.
Right? Not because they were a teacher this or whatever that, but to really look back at their life and really harvest what they learned from their life, and what was that thing they really had to offer the community, and they offered it. I mean, that they had this way, they got acknowledged as elders by doing something with us that allowed them to convey that elder gift that was just from their lived life. Wow. And for us to receive it. And in that same community gathering, we welcomed in the first children that were born to people in the community. And so we had these babies and these elders, and there's this way in which everybody's, their own like deep memory was waking up to this quality of community that was suddenly snapping into place, where it wasn't just a bunch of us doing us, but all of a sudden we had elders and we had babies, and the larger network of the community was starting to take shape. It's really joyful. And I don't even know the words for when these ancient trod upon memories of when our ancestors did live in healthy community. Because I'm not one of those people that looks back as tribal as bad.
Right.
That I actually believe our origin peoples lived really well in their environments. And some environments actually were really easy to live well in. There's this idea that all they ever did was hunt and gather and try to survive. It's like, well, yes, they hunted and gathered, but in a lot of environments, that didn't take much to survive.
Right.
I'm in the Pacific Northwest in North America. They estimate it took people about an hour a day. An hour a day. That's all. That's the work.
Yeah.
What do you do with the rest of the day? Well, this really interesting art form, right? That's come out of this part of the world, this very particular style and very skilled craftspeople. Not that there aren't skilled craftspeople all over the world in these things, but, sorry, I'm getting a little bit far afield. But the point is, we have these memories that we rarely get to activate. Instead, what's getting activated is this in-between stuff, which is all of this history where humans have been really crappy to each other. Yeah. Like really, that's what's all activated around us today, instead of this deeper community-based memory of, oh, this is how this works. Oh, that's that thing I've been longing for and could never put my finger on. We have this one ritual. I'll just share this because it's so cool to do.
Yeah.
So everybody, like, we want to call in some vision we want to try to be clear about together. We figure out who all the stakeholders are in that vision actually happening in the world. And then everybody draws a stakeholder, and that's the spirit they're going to embody. And we all dance. And through the dance, we look at what the interactions are that happen through the dance. And it's like a 2-hour-long dance. It's a long time. A lot of interactions happen with different things, but it's all based on who are you dancing, right? So the interpretation of all these interactions. So like, there's one time in the dance where, I was dancing some energy and I collapsed down. I felt all this grief coming through. Someone else came over me. I didn't even know who it was until I finally looked up. And the way that got interpreted later is that I can't remember what the grief was, but the energy that had done that, the person, they'd been dancing the spirit of true love.
Wow.
And so that's a moment in which love was the message. And yet there was no knowledge in the moment that that's who it was, but they're dancing with me, lifted the energy back up again. The grief passed. The person who was dancing the earth came by and sort of swirled around with that grief that I was dumping out, and then did this big movement in their dance. So it was like the earth being able to take that grief and transform it into energy that got to be part of the ecosystem. This is a tiny moment in a 2-hour dance.
Wow.
So impactful. So doing that and then sharing and learning what we learned from it, it's so joyful. I mean, we go to dinner that night and we just can't stop talking about the magic that we're doing together.
Wow.
We can't have that without the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So beautiful, Christina. I love this. I love this conversation. Yeah, I wish I could talk to you forever and ever. There's just so much beauty, experience, and wisdom, and application going on in your sphere. And so I'm glad that you all will be able to follow up and hear and see more of what she's doing by following the links in the description box. I have to double check that we're streaming from the same place that I thought I was streaming to make sure that's the truth right now. But if it's not, it will be in a few minutes. So I'm so thankful that you're here to speak with us today, Christina, and I hope to talk with you again.
Thank you so much. I would be honored to be here anytime. You know where to find me. It's lovely to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys, I will see you next time. Ta-ta.